In almost every photograph of some great triumph, there's a person standing just outside the frame, the one who carried the thing that made it possible, but who never actually made it into the shot. And usually, that's fine. Nobody really stops to think about it, because that's just how these things go. But in this one, the man outside the frame hadn't just been left out of the picture, he'd been left up on the mountain, overnight, in the open, to freeze. And that's the strange part, because a whole country looked at this photo and celebrated it for 50 years, yet nobody ever really saw the thing sitting right there inside it. The truth had been in the frame the entire time.
Resting on two famous faces, on one small, ordinary object nobody thought to look at twice, an oxygen mask. The 31st of July, 1954. This one's for the ones who stay. The noticers, something ordinary, except it never was. Oh, wait, a mask? How does a mask bring down a whole story a nation believed for half a century? I mean, it's just breathing gear. Everybody up there is wearing one. So, on its own, no, that can't be it. Except, hang on, that is the thing, isn't it?
Because it isn't really about the mask at all. It's about what the mask is quietly telling us. And once that clicks, the whole story just comes apart in our hands. None of it looks like much on its own, though. A camp gets moved a little higher up the mountain. Just one freezing night. A pair of boots. A headlamp out on the rocks. Small things. But line them all up, and together they decide whether a man walks home with his feet, and whether another man dies a hero or a liar. All of it. Hiding inside a photograph everyone was sure they'd already seen.
Okay, let me start with the simple part, the part everyone agrees on. K2, second highest mountain on the planet, and climbers call it the Savage Mountain, because for every handful of people who reach the top, it keeps one. Italy had been chasing this summit for half a century. 5 expeditions, 52 years, nothing. So when 2 Italians finally stand up there, 1 year after Everest, it's enormous. The country gets its flag, its photograph, its moment. And that part is true, by the way. They reached the top. Nobody's ever seriously doubted that. So, where's the problem? Well, the problem takes 50 years to float up. And it starts with a question I didn't even think to ask at first. Who carried the oxygen? Because those 2 men on top, they didn't haul their own bottles up through the death zone. Somebody else did that. And that somebody is the one standing just outside the frame. So, down the mountain we go, one day before the summit. The youngest climber on the whole expedition is 24. His name is Walter Bonatti, and by every honest account, he's the strongest man up there. He can work at an altitude where most people just stop, which is the first thing that snags me. Because if he's the strongest, then why isn't he the one going for the summit? And the plain answer is, he could have been. He was the obvious pick. But the summit went to 2 older men instead, so Bonatti got handed a different job, along with a Hunza porter named Amir Mehdi. Carry the oxygen up, the heavy bottles, get them to the last camp, and come back down. Now, Mehdi. I have to stop on Mehdi for a second. Because a year before this, on a different mountain, this man carried a half-frozen climber down on his own back and saved his life. They called him the Tiger of Hunza. And he had a quiet little dream of his own too. To be the first Pakistani ever to stand on top of K2. So it's these 2. The strongest climber and the tiger, roped together, climbing up into the dark, hauling the oxygen the summit pair can't finish without. And they get up to where the last camp is supposed to be, and it isn't there. Now, my first thought is the boring one, that they just got lost. Wrong ledge. It happens up there in the dark. But no, because Bonatti stands there and scans the rocks, and he shouts their names into the wind. Lino! Achille! Answer me! Nothing. Only silence. The camp wasn't lost, though. It had been moved. Higher up, off to one side.
onto ground Bonatti couldn't even reach. And this is where I actually stopped, because why? Why would anyone move the one camp two exhausted men are climbing toward in the dark? Maybe the first spot was bad, unstable. That'd be fair enough. And that is the reason they gave later, that they'd moved it to dodge a wall of ice. Except, no, that wasn't it.
The real one only came out decades later, from one of the two men who was actually up there.
Fear.
Fear of a 24-year-old, because Compagnoni was afraid of the kid, afraid Bonatti would reach the tent, join the summit push at dawn, and stand on top of K2 with no bottled oxygen at all. And if the youngest man pulled that off, well, then whatever Compagnoni managed up there would just be a footnote. It's an ugly reason, but not a monstrous one. Just a small, human fear at the worst possible moment. So he put the tent where the boy couldn't follow, which means the oxygen the summit needed and the man they were scared of were the exact same delivery. So they wanted the bottles, they just didn't want the person carrying them. Eventually a voice does come out of the dark. Leave the oxygen. Go back down. But going down, in the dark, on that ice, that isn't an option anymore. And Mehdi's in no shape to even try. And then, Bonatti sees it. A headlamp, glowing on the rocks, maybe 180 meters away. So close. So he calls out to it. He begs them, come down, or at least guide us in. And the headlamp switches off. And I keep stalling right there, on that one moment, telling myself, maybe they just didn't hear him. Maybe the wind took it. But no. The light went out, and that was the answer. So now there are two men at 8,100 meters in the death zone. No tent, no sleeping bags, no way up, and no way down. So they dig a shallow hole in the snow, climb into it, and just wait to find out if they'll still be alive in the morning. -50, the highest night any human being had ever spent out in the open. And somehow, they both live, which, by any measure that makes sense, should not have happened. So they made it. Both of them walked off that mountain. And for half a second, that almost sounds like the story gets a soft landing. It doesn't. Because here's the part I genuinely can't get past. Same night, same hole, same cold. Two men. One of them walks away almost untouched, but the other loses every toe on both feet. And I really want there to be a reason for that. Some difference in strength or will, or just luck. But no, it wasn't strength. And it wasn't luck either, not really. It was the boots. Oh, just boots. Because Bonatti had proper high-altitude boots, and Mehdi didn't. He'd been handed ordinary army boots, and by some accounts, they were 2 sizes too small. So the Tiger of Hunza, the man who carried the oxygen that put 2 other men in the history books, he came down that mountain on a stretcher, 8 months in a hospital, and he never climbed again. When he got home, he put his ice axe away and told his family he never wanted to see it again. And I can't help it. I keep lining him up next to another name, because 1 year earlier, over on Everest, a porter named Tenzing Norgay stood on a summit, and the whole world learned his name. 1 year later, Amir Mehdi carried the oxygen, lost every toe on both feet, and got quietly forgotten. Same job, same mountains, completely different ending. Okay, I need a second with this next part. Because up to here, it's a mountain story. Cold and cruel, but still just a mountain story. The kind where things go wrong up high. But the strangest part isn't on the mountain at all. It's what happened once everyone got home. Because the expedition comes back to Italy as national heroes. But the story they tell, it doesn't match the one that actually happened. Now, I figured they'd just quietly leave Bonatti out of it. That's the usual move, right? The porter and the young one fade into the background. But no. It's worse than leaving him out. Because in the story they tell,
Bonatti is the villain. He gets accused of trying to steal the summit for himself, of secretly using the oxygen that night in the snow, of abandoning Mehdi. So the exact things that were done to him get pinned on him. And the official account, written by the leader of the expedition, puts all of it in print. And that night in the snow, the one that cost a man every toe on both feet, it barely gets a mention, like a tiny logistical footnote. So the strongest man on the mountain, the one who carried the oxygen and left it exactly where it needed to be, comes home a thief.
And a traitor. And he spends the next 10 years saying over and over, it didn't happen that way. And almost nobody believes him. So he gets pushed out of the climbing world he'd given everything to. And by 1965, he's quietly stopped climbing altogether. And this is the part where I honestly wondered, how does anyone even fight that? It's one man's word against two summit heroes and a national committee. How does a single person prove the truth when everyone with any power has already agreed on the lie? And it turns out, he'd had the proof the entire time. So had everyone else. It was right there in the photograph, because Bonatti, alone, for years, kept pointing at one thing in it: the masks. And his logic is so simple, it's almost annoying. The official story said the oxygen ran out 2 hours below the summit. Okay, but if that's true, then why, in the photo taken at the very top, are both men still wearing their oxygen masks? Because, here's the thing. If the oxygen had really run out down below, the mask would be the first thing to come off. It's dead weight up there, useless, but there they are, still wearing them, at the summit, which means, oh, so those masks meant the oxygen lasted longer than the official story admitted. On its own, not a courtroom proof, but the visible crack that made people finally question the whole account. And if the story was wrong, then Bonatti carried those bottles up faithfully and left them exactly where he always said he did. And that proof had been printed in newspapers, framed on walls, taught in schools, for 50 years. And nobody looked at the masks. Honestly, I find that harder to sit with than the lie itself, because the evidence wasn't hidden. It was famous, and we just didn't look. It took until 2004. By then, almost everyone involved was old, or already gone. And then, Lino Laccadelli, one of the two men who actually stood on that summit, finally just told the truth, that the camp had been moved on purpose, to keep Bonatti away. And the oxygen hadn't run out below the top at all. It was still there, at the summit. So everything Bonatti had been saying, for half a century, was true. 3 years after that, the institution itself, the Italian Alpine Club, formally revised its account and cleared his name. Bonatti was in his late 70s by then. He'd been right the entire time. And the thing that finally proved it had been sitting in plain sight, on two celebrated faces, since 1954. So, back to the photograph, the one I keep looking at. We say we conquered K2. We reached the top. And it's the kind of sentence a whole nation can stand inside and feel proud of. But I keep thinking about the outside of that sentence, because just off the edge of the frame, there's a man with no toes, a man who was told to freeze so the picture could be taken, and another one, carrying the proof of his own innocence for 50 years, while his country called him a liar. The climb gained a summit, a flag, a photograph a nation could point to. And I'm honestly not sure anymore who that triumph even belonged to, whether those two men in the frame owned that moment, or whether the moment quietly owned them, held them inside a lie they couldn't put down for 50 years. Because the ones who finally saw it weren't the ones cheering the photograph. They were the ones who bothered to look at the edge of it. And that's the thing I can't shake now. How many triumphs am I still looking at, without ever once checking who got left just outside the frame?